Life twisted unexpectedly. Sitting across from her, my heart raced, her eyes, sharp yet kind, hiding secrets. One question shattered my calm: why are you really here? Sparks ignited, and fate tested love, trust, everything. If you like our videos, then press like button, and if you want more videos daily, then press subscribe button, and for notification press bell icon. Thanks. The message on my phone felt like a weight pressing against my chest. Please, cover my blind date tonight. I can't get out of work. My brother's desperation had no room for argument. Normally, I would have laughed it off. Blind dates were a nightmare, a cruel exercise in forced small talk and polite lies. But tonight, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin, and yet a small, stubborn spark whispered, maybe it won't be so bad. I glanced at the clock. My toddler's bedtime stories had been half read, his little voice fading into the night. Work was waiting in the early hours. Life had been a relentless march of responsibilities, a tightrope walk between 2 jobs and sleepless nights. And somehow, in the midst of all that chaos, I was now hurtling toward an unknown evening with a stranger, a beautiful, unknowable stranger. The restaurant's warm glow spilled onto the pavement as I approached, and my nerves coiled tighter. My shoes scuffed against the wet stones, echoing my inner trepidation. And then I saw her. She was sitting at the corner table, the kind of woman who could stop the world for a moment with just her presence. A soft red dress clung to her curves, the fabric catching the light as if it had been spun from sunset itself. Her hair fell in waves, framing a face that was both confident and contemplative, eyes sharp yet holding a kindness I hadn't expected. She looked, patient but wary, like a reader poised over the first line of a book they weren't sure they wanted to finish. Alex. Her voice broke through the hum of the restaurant. Warm, questioning, soft but commanding attention. Yes. I mean, hi. My words stumbled out, clumsy, and I immediately cursed them internally. I wasn't ready for this. Her eyes, the way they seemed to see right through me, reflected the storm in my chest. My heart thudded, loud and irregular, as if trying to warn me of the night ahead. She smiled faintly, a teasing lift of the eyebrow, and my stomach dropped. I slid into the chair opposite her, feeling the thin veneer of calm I had tried to muster shatter under her gaze. The waiter approached, menus in hand, but we hardly looked at them. Words felt unnecessary, our eyes held conversation far richer than the paper between us. The first moments were stiff, polite, careful. I laughed at the wrong moments, cleared my throat at the right ones, and tried to keep my brother's name from tumbling off my tongue too early. She asked questions, simple ones, layered with hidden intent. Where I came from, what I did for work, whether I liked the city or not. And every answer I gave felt like a tightrope, walking between truth and the necessary deception. I tried to be charming, joked about my brother's absence, tried to make her laugh. For a moment, it almost worked, her lips curved, her eyes softened, but then, just as quickly, the smile faltered, replaced with the faint narrowing of curiosity. So, why are you really here? Her words landed like a dagger. Calm. Piercing. Precise. My chest constricted as though someone had wound a cord around it and pulled taut. I froze. The restaurant's hum, the clinking of cutlery, the soft background music, all faded into a distant echo. Could she see through me already? Or was fate playing some cruel joke, tossing me into a night that demanded honesty I wasn't ready to give? My mind raced, each heartbeat marking a countdown to some inevitable revelation. The air between us thickened. I noticed the subtle flicker of candlelight on the table, shadows dancing like tiny messengers of truth and pretense. Her eyes didn't waver, they held me, steady, unyielding. I wanted to look away, to hide the panic threatening to spill across my face, but some part of me, a reckless part, wanted to meet her gaze fully, to show the fragments of myself I had long buried. I tried to respond with a joke, a feeble shield, but the words died on my tongue. Her question hung in the air, heavy and insistent, a silent challenge that demanded more than I could muster. My hands, resting on the table, twitched as though they too understood the weight of the moment. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves in the nearby trees, a whisper of movement that felt like an omen. The city lights glimmered against the damp streets, and for a fleeting second, I imagined stepping outside, letting the night swallow me whole, escaping the intensity of her gaze. But the thought was gone as quickly as it came. Some invisible thread, kept me anchored here, across from her, caught in the tension between what was expected and what was possible. She leaned back slightly, a subtle tilt of her head, eyes scanning me as if weighing every gesture, every heartbeat, every half-spoken word. I could almost see the calculus of curiosity and suspicion, the unspoken question in her mind, who is he really? I swallowed hard. The faint scent of her perfume, something floral, something warm, reached me, and for a moment, my rational thoughts collided with a visceral pull I didn't understand. There was an intimacy in that shared space, despite the distance imposed by truth and deception. A quiet tension, taut and electric, stretched between us. The waiter returned, but I barely noticed. The menus were redundant, our conversation, unspoken yet electric, had already taken over. My gaze flickered to her hands resting lightly on the table, and I felt a pang of something fragile, something dangerous. Connection. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap, to say something that would dissolve the lie. But instead, I sat frozen, caught in the delicate web of curiosity, attraction, and fear. Each second stretched into eternity. Finally, she smiled, soft, enigmatic, unreadable. A smile that suggested she knew more than she let on, a smile that promised revelations, and perhaps, heartbreak. My throat tightened. The night had only just begun, yet I already felt its weight pressing down, heavy with possibility, heavy with consequence. And then, as the candlelight flickered one last time, I realized it, this wasn't just a blind date. It was a test, of honesty, of courage, of the fragile hope that even amidst chaos, two people could find understanding, connection, maybe even love. But the night had a twist yet to come, one that would leave us both irrevocably changed. I took a shaky breath, bracing myself. Whatever happened next, there was no turning back. The question lingered between us, sharp and precise, a needle threading the unknown. So, why are you really here? And with that, the first act of our story began. After the first question, the silence between us wasn't empty, it was charged. My heartbeat seemed loud enough to echo against the restaurant walls. I tried to focus on the menu, pretending to read, but every glance at her stole my attention. Her presence filled the space, warm yet enigmatic, like sunlight filtered through autumn leaves. I guess I'm here because my brother begged me, I said finally, voice low, careful. But, maybe it's not as terrible as I thought. I forced a laugh, the sound brittle in the quiet. She tilted her head, curious, eyes sparkling with amusement. That's not a very convincing reason. There was a challenge in her tone, playful but precise, like she was unraveling a puzzle she already suspected was interesting. I chuckled nervously. Well, then I guess you'll have to decide if I'm worth your time. I tried to be charming, but inside, I was acutely aware of the lie resting on my shoulders. Her laughter was soft, melodic, like wind chimes brushing against early morning light. It was effortless, unguarded, yet there was an intelligence behind it, a quiet appraisal that made me feel both seen and exposed. She wasn't just observing me, she was reading me, tracing the edges of my hesitations, my humor, my truths hidden beneath layers of circumstance. We began to talk, not about the superficialities of blind dates, but about life itself. The conversation flowed like a river finding its path, curving through laughter and pauses alike. I spoke of my toddler, of the small victories and disasters of fatherhood, of the exhaustion and rare joys that came with balancing two jobs. She listened, genuinely. Nods, small smiles, and the occasional quirk of her eyebrow punctuated my words. Her curiosity wasn't intrusive, it was magnetic. I noticed the faint tilt of her head, the way her fingers rested lightly on the table, and I felt an almost dizzying pull toward her, as though gravity itself had shifted. "What's the hardest part of your life?" she asked suddenly, voice soft. The question hit me differently than the first. It wasn't testing, it was probing, intimate, demanding honesty. I swallowed, feeling the weight of sleepless nights, the worry for my child, the constant balancing act between responsibility and desire. "Honestly, it's feeling like I'm failing at everything at once," I admitted. "Being a parent, holding down jobs, trying not to let the world, or my son, see me crumble. Most days, I just survive." Her expression softened, the edges of her curiosity blending into something warmer, gentler. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," I said quietly, looking away for a moment, staring at the flickering candle between us. Its small flame danced, fragile yet persistent, and for some reason, it reminded me of hope. Tiny, vulnerable, yet unyielding. She leaned slightly forward, her eyes catching the light. "You're stronger than you think," she said, almost to herself, but loud enough for me to hear. Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. There was no judgment, no pity, just recognition, a quiet acknowledgement of struggle and resilience. It was intimate without touch, profound without declaration. And for the first time that evening, I felt seen, not as the man pretending to be someone else, but as me, messy, tired, flawed, alive. We laughed again, lighter now, sharing stories of embarrassing childhood memories, of meals gone wrong, of awkward encounters and awkward first dates. I felt a spark, subtle yet undeniable, a connection threading through the conversation, delicate yet persistent. Every glance, every laugh, every pause seemed to pull us closer without a single word of confession. Then, just as I began to relax, she asked another question, one that sent a shiver down my spine. "Do you ever regret choices you've made?" It was simple, but layered. It forced reflection, exposure. I hesitated, the weight of the past pressing into the present. Regret was something I carried like a shadow, silent, persistent. Yet in her eyes, I saw patience, not judgment. "Yes," I said finally, quiet. "But I've learned that some regrets are necessary. They remind you what matters. They remind you to keep going, to hold on to what you love." She smiled softly, a hint of admiration in the curve of her lips. "That's insightful. Most people would run from regret. But you seem to carry it well." Her words were both a compliment and a mirror. I looked at her, really looked, noticing the way the candlelight softened the planes of her face, the slight tilt of her head as she listened, the delicate way her fingers brushed her hair. There was something fragile, luminous about her, like she too carried quiet burdens beneath the surface. The evening slipped forward, moments stacking like delicate dominoes. Hands nearly touched across the table, accidental brushes that lingered a second too long. The air was charged, every laugh, every glance, every pause weighted with unspoken meaning. Outside, the city lights blurred into a cascade of golden bokeh through the rain-specked window. The wind whispered against the glass, as if conspiring with the night to keep us suspended in this fragile bubble of connection. Time became elastic. I forgot about the lie, about the small anxiety gnawing in the pit of my stomach. All I could think about was the woman across from me, the warmth in her eyes, the subtle pull of her presence, the thread of curiosity and intrigue tying me to her like a kite to a string in a storm. Then, just as I let myself lean into the spark, a chill flickered through me, the knowledge of what I was hiding, the inevitability of the truth that would soon demand revelation. A gentle panic, a whisper of dread, traced my spine. The night was intoxicating, yes, but precarious. One misstep, one careless word, and the fragile connection could shatter. And yet, despite the tension, despite the deception, despite the fear, something profound had begun. A thread had formed between us, fragile, electric, undeniable. It was a first spark, the kind that lingers long after the initial flame, promising warmth, danger, and possibility in equal measure. Her laughter faded into a quiet smile, eyes catching the candlelight once more. I took a slow breath, steadying the fluttering in my chest. Whatever this night held, I knew one thing for certain: I was already changed. The spark had ignited, and there was no turning back. The question she asked at the start, the one that seemed so simple, still lingered. So, why are you really here? And in that charged silence, I realized that the answer no longer mattered entirely. What mattered was the moment, the connection, the spark, the tentative pull of two hearts orbiting dangerously close, on the brink of something neither of us could yet name. The night stretched on, mysterious and magnetic, leaving both of us suspended in anticipation, on the cusp of revelation, longing, and the first stirrings of something neither of us could deny. The laughter from the previous chapter of the evening still lingered, a warm echo in the dim light of the restaurant, but the air between us shifted subtly. It wasn't discomfort, not exactly. It was the quiet weight of unspoken truths pressing down, delicate yet undeniable. I noticed it in her eyes, the fleeting shadow behind the spark, the tiny crease in her brow that suggested she, too, carried a burden she couldn't, or wouldn't, reveal. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly, voice almost drowned by the hum of the restaurant but precise enough to cut through the space between us. I nodded, cautious. "Of course. Why are you really like this?" Her hand gestured vaguely at my posture, my hesitant smiles, the way I laughed at the wrong moments. "So polite. So careful. Is it because you're hiding something?" Her words felt like a mirror pressed to my chest, reflecting everything I tried to keep buried. The lie I had come here with, pretending to be my brother, suddenly seemed fragile, naive, and almost foolish. But even more than that, I realized she wasn't prying maliciously. She was curious, empathetic, reading between the lines with a subtle grace I hadn't expected. I hesitated. I could have deflected with a joke, a shrug, anything. But something about the openness in her gaze demanded honesty. I leaned back slightly, fingers lightly drumming the tabletop, and chose words that balanced caution with truth. "Maybe I'm hiding a little," I admitted, voice low, reflective. "But not everything. Life has a way of giving you lessons, some sharp, some gentle. I've learned to protect myself and the people I care about. Sometimes that means hiding pieces of myself." Her eyes softened, and I saw something I hadn't expected: recognition. A flicker that said she understood, or at least felt a connection, as though the shadows I carried were not foreign to her own. We returned to lighter conversation, but the undercurrent had changed. Now, every laugh, every glance, every tilt of her head carried a subtle awareness, a sense that we were both circling truths neither of us had yet fully revealed. I told her small things, stories about my child, the chaos of juggling work and life, fleeting moments of joy that glimmered like fireflies in the dark. Each story built trust, fragile yet growing, like a tentative bridge across the unspoken chasm. At one point, she reached for the glass of water in front of her, brushing her fingers against mine ever so slightly. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, yet it sparked a warmth that laced through my chest and lingered long after our hands separated. I caught myself watching the curve of her smile, the way her eyes flickered toward me when she thought I wasn't looking. "Do you ever regret things?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a question for conversation, it was a question aimed at my heart. I froze, caught off guard by the vulnerability in her tone. Regret was a shadow I carried quietly, a companion in sleepless nights and quiet reflections. The truth spilled before I could stop it. "Yes," I said. "More than I'd like to admit. But regrets, they remind you what matters. They remind you who you want to be, even if it's hard. Even if it hurts." Her gaze softened further, and for a moment, the world outside the restaurant, the clinking cutlery, the hum of conversations, the flickering candlelight, faded into a gentle blur. It was just us, suspended in a space of unspoken understanding, tethered by empathy and curiosity, by shared experiences of quiet struggles. She smiled faintly, almost wistfully. I think everyone carries regrets. Some of us just hide them better than others. Our conversation danced between light and shadow. We spoke of small joys, books that had shaped our imaginations, films that had left indelible marks on our hearts, songs that echoed memories we couldn't explain. And yet, beneath the warmth, I sensed the layers she hid, the subtle hesitations that betrayed pain or past loss. It made me wonder what ghosts followed her through life, what regrets she carried like fragile glass. Outside, the night had deepened, and rain began tapping against the window in a soft, rhythmic pattern. The droplets traced streaks across the glass, mirroring the quiet turbulence of our evening. Candlelight flickered against her face, illuminating the delicate planes of her expression, highlighting the vulnerability she tried to mask with a confident posture. I wanted to reach across the table, to bridge the unspoken distance, to offer some comfort in the form of a touch or a word. But caution held me back, tethering me to the lie that still hovered over us. She wasn't aware of it, at least not yet, but I could feel its weight, pressing against every smile, every laugh, every almost touch. At one point, she excused herself briefly, and I watched her walk away, the red of her dress vivid against the muted interior, like a flame refusing to be ignored. I noticed how her shoulders carried a quiet grace, how her steps were deliberate yet hesitant, as though she too was balancing past wounds with present curiosity. When she returned, our eyes met again, and the space between us seemed charged, magnetic. The moment was fleeting, but it lingered in my chest, a quiet hum of possibility. Her gaze was no longer just curious, it was engaged, assessing, tentative but inviting. I felt the spark, subtle yet undeniable, threading between us, fragile yet persistent. As dessert arrived, the waiter's footsteps echoed in the background, but our focus remained entirely on each other. Her hand brushed lightly against the edge of the table, and I caught myself imagining the warmth of her touch lingering longer. The conversation continued, weaving stories and questions, smiles and silences. Every pause held weight, every glance carried meaning. And then, she asked something that caught me completely off guard. If you could change one thing about your life, would you? I hesitated, the weight of the question pressing down on me. Change. Regret. Truth. Lies. Choices I hadn't yet revealed. I realized that while I had been learning about her, listening, and connecting, there were parts of me still hidden, shadows I had yet to admit. Yes, I said finally, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. But only the things that wouldn't change who I am today. Only the lessons that make me stronger, or that brought me here, to this moment. She studied me silently for a heartbeat, and then her eyes softened once more, a subtle acknowledgement passing between us. The spark had grown, fragile but undeniable, bridging the distance created by lies and hidden truths. Outside, the rain intensified slightly, and the candlelight flickered in response. The world beyond the restaurant felt suspended, as if holding its breath with us, waiting for what would come next. I realized then that the evening had transformed. It was no longer just a blind date, no longer just an obligation or a favor for my brother. It had become a delicate dance of vulnerability and attraction, of curiosity and trust. And I knew, with a quiet certainty, that the truth, my truth, would have to reveal itself soon. The tension between what was hidden and what was felt was taut, ready to snap, yet impossibly magnetic. The spark was no longer a possibility, it was a presence, lingering between us, electric and fragile. And with every word, every glance, every pause, I felt the weight of it settle in my chest. The night was far from over, and the secrets we both carried promised that the path ahead would be anything. The rain had started softly, tapping against the window like distant fingers tracing a rhythm only we could feel. Outside, the city lights blurred into glowing ribbons against the dark, wet streets, each reflection rippling in the puddles below. The world felt suspended, as though it had paused for this fragile moment between us. I glanced at her across the table, the candlelight dancing across her face, highlighting the curve of her cheek and the subtle warmth in her eyes. "Looks like we'll be walking in the rain," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. There was no complaint, only quiet amusement, but I could sense the challenge in her gaze. A test of courage, perhaps, or curiosity. I hesitated, a part of me wanting to suggest a taxi, a safe escape, but something stubborn urged me forward. "Then we'll just have to share an umbrella," I said. The small canopy between us was barely enough, forcing us closer than either of us might have chosen. The air was electric, a charged current flowing in the space where our shoulders brushed, hands occasionally hovering near each other. Each accidental touch ignited a warmth that spread through my chest, curling in the pit of my stomach like fire. The conversation grew quieter, intimate in its restraint. Her laughter, previously light and melodic, now carried an undertone of reflection. She spoke of memories, dreams, moments of vulnerability carefully cloaked in humor. I shared glimpses of my own life, how the small victories with my son were sometimes the only light in a heavy world, how exhaustion and loneliness often shadowed the day-to-day, how moments like this, rare and unexpected, felt like a reprieve from reality. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the street, followed by the distant roll of thunder. I flinched instinctively, and she laughed softly, reaching for my arm in a protective gesture that sent a shiver down my spine. Her touch lingered longer than necessary, intimate yet teasing, a subtle promise of connection. The closer we walked, the more the world outside faded. The rain wasn't an annoyance, it was a symphony, drumming a rhythm that matched the fluttering in my chest. Each step seemed choreographed by some unseen hand, guiding us through the chaos of wet streets and flickering neon lights into a moment that felt suspended, almost sacred. And then, the spark of mischief and mystery appeared, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. I felt my stomach twist as I read the message, "You need to come home now, urgent." Her gaze lifted to mine, perceptive, questioning, though she didn't see the message. I swallowed hard, trying to maintain composure, but the words burned in my mind. What could this urgency be? Was it work? Or was it something from my past threatening to erupt into this fragile night? I nodded faintly, excusing myself for a moment to take the call. The tension was instantaneous, my heart raced, not from fear of her judgment, but from the fear of interruption, the fear of losing the delicate thread that had woven between us. She waited silently, her hands resting on the umbrella handle, shoulders relaxed yet attentive. When I returned, I felt the invisible thread taut, humming with electricity. I noticed how the raindrops clung to her hair, tiny prisms catching the streetlights like suspended diamonds. There was something poetic in the way the night had wrapped us in intimacy and suspense, the city acting as a silent observer to the beginnings of a bond neither of us had expected. We found refuge under a small cafe awning, our shared breaths creating tiny clouds in the cool night air. The warmth between us grew, subtle, intimate, a magnetic pull neither dared fully acknowledge. Every glance, every small gesture carried meaning, an almost touch here, a lingering look there. It was dangerous, this connection. Yet it was exhilarating. "Why are you really here?" she asked again, her voice soft, almost conspiratorial. Her question felt heavier this time. The rain, the city, the electric night, it all amplified its weight. I wanted to deflect with humor, to retreat into the comfort of polite lies, but the honesty I had glimpsed in her eyes demanded more. I hesitated, words catching like stones in my throat. Instead, I smiled faintly, choosing silence over explanation. The pause itself spoke volumes. She tilted her head, catching the faint glimmer of conflict in my eyes, and for the briefest moment, I wondered if she knew something, if she sensed the truth lurking beneath the surface. Time slowed. The umbrella above us became a fragile sanctuary against the night. The rain whispered against its canvas, and the distant city murmured in harmony with our quiet breaths. I felt her hand brush against mine again, subtle, teasing, almost involuntary. The warmth lingered longer than it should, a delicate spark igniting across the small space that separated us. We stood there, two figures enveloped in rain and light, suspended in a fragile moment where everything was possible and nothing was guaranteed. The connection deepened, quiet, electric, fragile, threading between us like lightning across a dark sky. Each heartbeat was a drum, each breath a silent confession. And then, without warning, a shadow flickered across the street, drawing my attention. For a heartbeat, I imagined the intrusion of the past, the echo of secrets waiting to crash into this night. My chest tightened, a silent warning. I wanted to look away, to run, but the pull toward her was stronger than fear. I realized then that the night was no longer just a date. It was a crucible, testing courage, trust, and desire. The storm outside mirrored the storm within me, the push and pull of attraction, the thrill of risk, the danger of revelation. And though I didn't yet know what awaited us, I understood one thing: whatever happened next, the night would leave us irrevocably changed. Her eyes met mine, steady, unflinching, and I felt a spark that went beyond attraction, a fragile, undeniable acknowledgement that our paths had converged for reasons neither of us fully understood. The rain poured, the city breathed, and for a moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath. As we finally began to walk again, side by side, the distance between us felt charged with possibility. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, every quiet laugh carried weight. The umbrella above was insufficient to shelter us from the storm of our own emotions, but perhaps that was the point. The night demanded vulnerability, and neither of us could resist it. And as the rain eased into a soft drizzle, and the city lights painted long reflections across the wet pavement, I realized that despite the twists, the secrets, and the unknowns ahead, something remarkable had begun. A spark had been lit, delicate, fragile, but alive. And the night, this night, storm-wrapped and impossible, would never be forgotten. The city lights blurred behind the rain-specked window, casting long streaks across the quiet restaurant as we returned to our table. I could still feel the warmth of her hand from the walk, lingering in my chest like an ember refusing to die. But the ember threatened to flare into something uncontrollable, because the secret I had carried, my brother's lie, the truth about why I was here, was pressing down heavier than ever. I forced a smile, trying to keep my composure. "Sorry about that," I said, sliding back into my chair, urgent call from work. The words felt hollow, and I knew she could tell. Her eyes were sharper than I had realized, reading the lines of tension in my shoulders, the slight tremor in my voice. "Alex," she said softly, tilting her head, a faint frown knitting her brow. "There's something you're not telling me, isn't there?" I froze. The moment hung between us like fragile glass, delicate and sharp. Every instinct in me screamed to confess, to tell her everything, the lie, my brother's desperate message, the real reason I was sitting here, but fear anchored me. Fear that the night, this fragile connection, would shatter if she knew. Yet there was no time to hide it. The weight of the night, the intimacy, the electricity in the air demanded honesty. I took a slow breath, feeling the fire of her gaze sear through the shadows I had so carefully carried. I'm not here for my brother," I admitted finally, voice low, steady despite the tremor inside. "I came because I didn't have a choice. He begged me, and I agreed. I didn't plan to meet you. I wasn't supposed to be here." Her expression changed, first surprise, then confusion, then a faint, almost imperceptible smile that felt like both amusement and assessment. "So, you lied to me?" she asked gently, almost teasing, though the undercurrent of tension was undeniable. "I didn't lie to hurt you," I said, leaning slightly forward, hands resting on the table. "I lied because I had no idea how to be honest without ruining everything. I didn't expect any of this." My words faltered, but the truth carried weight, shaking loose the carefully constructed walls between us. She studied me for a long moment, eyes flicking from mine to the flickering candle between us, back again. Then she laughed softly, a sound that melted some of the tension, yet held a razor-sharp edge. "You're impossible," she said, shaking her head. "Most men would have run. Most men would have hidden behind excuses. But you actually showed up." Her words cut through me, not judgment, not anger, but recognition, admiration, and something else I couldn't name. Relief washed over me, tempered by the lingering fear of rejection. The night had shifted. The lie had been revealed, but instead of collapsing, something deeper seemed to have formed, a spark tempered by truth. We talked then, openly, vulnerably. I shared fragments of my life, my fears, my exhaustion, my joys with my son. She spoke of her own burdens, her quiet struggles, the dreams she had chased and the ones she had set aside. The conversation was no longer casual, it was raw, intimate, a bridge built from honesty and tentative trust. At one point, she reached across the table, letting her fingers lightly brush mine. The touch was electric, lingering, and I felt my chest tighten with an ache that was equal parts desire and fear. Desire for her, fear of losing her if I misstepped again. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the streets glossy and reflective, mirrors of the world above. The city hummed quietly, a soft backdrop to the storm of emotions between us. Her eyes caught the reflections of the lights, and I noticed a flicker of amusement, curiosity, and something warmer, something that mirrored the pull I felt toward her. "You're not like anyone I've met," she said suddenly, her voice low, almost vulnerable. "You carry everything so openly. And yet, there's still mystery. Still so much I don't know." I smiled faintly, tracing the rim of my glass with a finger. "Maybe that's the point," I said softly. "Maybe the mystery is part of the reason we're here. Maybe it's the only way to see if what's real can survive a little chaos." Her laughter was soft, musical, lingering in the quiet corners of the restaurant. It carried warmth, relief, and an unspoken acknowledgement that the night had been dangerous, but necessary. She leaned forward slightly, eyes catching the last flicker of candlelight, and I felt the invisible threads between us tighten, drawing us closer with every heartbeat. And then, the twist landed like a thunderclap. My phone buzzed again, a different number this time. I froze, glancing at the screen, my heart lurching. It was my brother. "You forgot something important. Call me now. It's urgent." I looked at her, guilt flashing across my features. I have to take this," I said, reluctant, but the urgency in the message left no room for negotiation. She nodded, eyes sharp, perceptive. "Go," she said softly, her voice steady but layered with unspoken understanding. "I'll wait." I stepped away, heart pounding, the distance between us heavier than ever. I took the call outside, rain-slick streets gleaming in the faint glow of neon. The words from my brother tumbled over themselves, frantic, urgent. Something had happened, a situation only I could fix. But as I listened, part of me ached to return to the warmth I had just left behind, to the woman who had seen me for who I was, to the spark that now burned brighter than ever. By the time I returned, the restaurant was quieter, shadows lengthened, and the candle had flickered down to a stub. She was sitting where I had left her, calm, composed, yet radiating a quiet tension that mirrored my own. Her eyes met mine, and in them, I saw patience, curiosity, and hope. I exhaled slowly, sitting back down. "It's taken care of," I said, voice low but steady. "Everything's fine." She smiled faintly, a mix of relief and subtle amusement. "You always have to be the hero, don't you?" "I try," I said, almost sheepishly, but the tension eased slightly. For the first time that night, I felt a fragile peace settle over us. The twist, the revelation of my lie, the interruption, the unknown urgency, had tested us, but instead of breaking the fragile bond, it had strengthened it. We had survived the first trial, and the connection between us was undeniable now. Sparks lingered, electric and dangerous, threading between glances, touches, and quiet laughter. And as the last candle guttered and the night edged toward its close, I realized something profound. No matter what challenges lay ahead, this night, the twist, the revelation, the spark, would be a turning point. A night we would both remember, a night that had changed everything. And in that quiet moment, as our eyes met across the table, I understood one thing clearly: love, trust, and courage often arrived hand in hand with chaos, mystery, and revelation. The twist had been revealed. The spark was real. And the night had only just begun. The morning sun spilled through the restaurant windows, warm and golden, painting the table with soft light. The city outside was awakening, but inside, time seemed suspended. The night's chaos, the lies, the rain, the confessions, had settled into a fragile calm, leaving only us and the weight of everything unsaid, yet felt. She sipped her coffee, eyes catching the sunlight, her expression contemplative. The red of her dress from the night before seemed to linger in memory, vibrant and impossible to ignore. I watched her, aware of the electricity that still hummed in the space between us. Every subtle gesture, the tilt of her head, the curve of her lips, the way her fingers traced the rim of the cup, made my chest ache in ways words could never capture. "Alex," she said softly, voice carrying a quiet gravity, "about last night." I nodded, heart racing. Every instinct told me that honesty, finally, was the only way forward. The lie, the secrets, the near misses, they were all behind us now. What mattered was what we chose next. "I didn't come here expecting anything," I admitted, my voice low, reflective. "But then, something changed. With you. Something I can't ignore." Her gaze met mine, unwavering. "I felt it too," she said, and there was a vulnerability there, a crack in her otherwise composed exterior. "I don't know how this, whatever this is, works, but I know I want to find out." Her words were a balm, yet also a spark. I reached across the table, lightly brushing her hand. The contact was electric but tender, a silent confirmation that the connection we had built, through lies, revelations, laughter, and fear, was real. The city beyond the window continued to wake, indifferent to our moment, but inside, the world had narrowed to the two of us. I thought of my son, my responsibilities, the chaos that life often demanded, yet none of it seemed impossible when her hand was in mine. "Love," she whispered, almost to herself, "is always a risk, isn't it?" I smiled faintly, feeling a rush of warmth. "Yes," I said, "but some risks are worth it." Her eyes softened, shimmering with something fragile, hopeful, and undeniably human. We lingered in that space, words unnecessary, our breaths synchronized, hearts aligning in ways we hadn't anticipated. The tension that had threaded through the night, fear, deception, curiosity, had transformed into trust, intimacy, and something more profound than either of us had expected. I thought back to the first moment I had seen her, the question that had cut through me like a needle: "So, why are you really here?" I had come with hesitation, with lies, with exhaustion from life's relentless march. But now, sitting across from her, I realized that the night had been a journey, through fear, discovery, and quiet sparks of connection, leading us to this singular truth: love demanded courage. She leaned forward slightly, her fingers curling over mine, eyes searching mine for something unspoken. I understood immediately, this was the choice. To hold back would be denial, to step forward was to embrace everything, the chaos, the past, the unknown future. "I want to be honest with you," I said, voice steady. "Not just tonight, not just with words. With my life. With my heart. With everything I am." Her smile was radiant, tentative, and breathtaking. "I want that too," she whispered. The world seemed to tilt slightly, as though acknowledging the shift. The sun outside flared against the wet streets, reflecting brilliance across the city. The moment was cinematic, every detail amplified by emotion, the shimmer of sunlight, the warmth of her hand, the quiet hum of life continuing around us. But in that space, nothing else mattered. Only us. I took her hand fully into mine, holding it deliberately, letting the warmth and gravity of our connection settle. The spark that had started as curiosity, teasing, and tension had become a flame, steady, resilient, undeniable. "You're incredible," I said quietly, words inadequate for the depth I felt. "For seeing me. For understanding me. For making me want more than I've let myself want in years." Her eyes glistened, the faintest tremor in her lips betraying emotion she didn't voice. "And you've made me feel alive," she said softly. "Like for the first time in a long time, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." We sat in silence for a heartbeat, 1,000 unspoken thoughts passing between us. And then, with the confidence that only trust and desire can create, I leaned forward slightly, bridging the space, closing the distance, letting the unspoken words translate into action. Our lips met, tentative at first, careful, tasting the fragility of trust, the weight of revelation. The kiss deepened, a quiet crescendo of all the tension, all the curiosity, all the connection that had threaded through the past nights. It was tender, electric, affirming. A promise, a spark, a beginning. When we finally parted, breaths mingling, hearts racing, I realized that the choice had been made, not with words, but with courage, vulnerability, and a willingness to risk everything for something real. She rested her head briefly against my shoulder, a quiet gesture of trust, and I felt the future stretch before us like a canvas, blank but full of promise. The night, the rain, the lies, the revelations, all had led to this. And now, we could move forward together, unafraid of the unknown, emboldened by the connection we had forged. Outside, the sun continued to climb, the city coming fully to life. Inside, the warmth lingered, a cocoon of intimacy and hope. For the first time in a long while, I felt complete, not because life was perfect, but because the choice had been made, to embrace love, fully, without hesitation. And in that moment, I understood, love is not flawless. It is messy, unpredictable, challenging, and often terrifying. But it is worth every risk, every revelation, every spark that ignites along the way. We held each other's hands across the table, eyes locked, smiles shy but radiant. The night had been a crucible, testing courage, trust, and desire. And now, standing at the edge of morning, we were unbreakable. Together. The sparks that had ignited between us, hesitant, fragile, electric, had become a steady flame, lighting the path ahead. And as the golden sunlight streamed through the windows, I realized one truth above all: some nights change everything. Some choices define a lifetime. And some connections are worth choosing above all else. I looked at her, fully, honestly, and whispered, "I choose us." Her smile answered, bright and unwavering. "Then I choose us too." And with that, the story that had begun with a lie, a blind date, and a spark of curiosity, culminated in trust, love, and the courage to embrace the unknown together.